Okay. So the last lecture I had talked to you about fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, last of which I just gave a small introduction. I hope all of you are able to hear me properly. In case if anyone is unable to hear my voice, please send a message in the chat box. Okay. So I also gave some description about what is fabrication and falsification, and how they can affect integrity, research integrity, and things like that. And because you see, data fabrication has a lot of implications, mostly in the field of biology and medicine, because usually in those areas of research, very often we have live subjects, living subjects, either they could be animals or sometimes even human beings. So when you try to fabricate data in those kind of research areas and publish those results, the subsequent readers of those publications, they would believe whatever you have published is true, and they may like to do some further work on those results which you have already published, fabricated results, and they may go totally different direction altogether, which could be sometimes even dangerous also, because there are living beings involved in the research. So sometimes it can have very, very serious implications also. Otherwise, for example, in the field of physics research, etc., it may not be so drastic and life-threatening. Okay. All right, so now we come to the third one, which is plagiarism. And plagiarism happens to be, again, one of the most unethical of all the scientific misconducts. And so before I go ahead with this lecture, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of Dr. Praveen Chadda, who's an acknowledged Indian expert on plagiarism issues. Dr. Chadda was with the Department of Atomic Energy at BRC. He was the topper of 17th batch of training school in BRC. Then after some time, he moved on to the RR-CAT Center at Indore. And then for some time, he was also the director for UGC-DA Consortium for Scientific Research at Indore. So Dr. Chadda has written several articles on the issue of plagiarism and also research and academic and research ethics. And he has written several books, and I would like all of you to read these articles, which are very, very illuminating, and one can learn a lot on the subject. Then the University Grants Commission in 2021, it brought out a volume on academic integrity and research quality. And this volume is available on the internet. One can easily download this volume. Again, there are several articles related to the issue of plagiarism in this volume. And I also advise all of you to download this, book or PDF file from the UGC website and go through the same. I'm sure many of you will find it very useful. And as I was saying, Dr. Chadda also has published several books, and some of the important ones are these: Ethics in Competitive Research, Do Not Get Scooped, Do Not Get Plagiarized. And there's another book with the title Plagiarism of Scientific Ideas and Indian Victims' Travails of Partial Closures. So they are very good books which have very illuminating articles, chapters, and I strongly advise all of you, whoever can get these books, they are not too expensive, or they sometimes probably they can be downloaded also from the internet. And please go through these books for your own benefit. Okay, so now coming to this big three scientific misconducts, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So today I will like to concentrate on the issue of plagiarism. So how is plagiarism defined? Okay, several statutory research bodies put forward various kinds of definitions, and probably one of the universal definition of plagiarism is that it is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. And as I said earlier in my earlier lecture, in while fabrication and data falsification have very clear perpetrators, in plagiarism, we have a very clearly identifiable victim whose credit has been stolen. And when does this plagiarism occur? Usually it occurs at the time when you try to publish your results. So plagiarism occurs during the writing up of a research report, and it occurs when the due credit is not given, okay, to the earlier research publications. And this severely violates research ethics during the publication process. So this is some kind of, in a nutshell, the meaning of plagiarism. And also our UGC, University Grants Commission, as I told you earlier, they have brought out a gazette sometime in 2018. And here also they have defined, UGC has defined that plagiarism means the practice of taking someone else's work or idea and passing them as one's own. And so I can also tell you that UGC is pretty serious about this issue. And if you go through this gazette, there are several points which have been made by UGC. And UGC has also laid down certain rules and regulations or standards or whatever you call them. They have tried to quantify what this idea of plagiarism, and they have also given punishments for various degrees of plagiarism which they have quantified. So UGC is very serious about this, and since all of you are in the initial part of your PhD training, I very strongly advise you that you must take this issue very, very seriously and try to avoid this plagiarism at any cost for your own benefit. And this will be very clear when we go down further in this lecture. So, so what kind of plagiarism we can come across? What are the different types of plagiarism one can encounter? One of the most common plagiarism types is what is called text plagiarism. And when does this occur? Whenever one tries to take another person's words or phrases or paragraphs from some previously published paper of some other person and then insert them in your own publications as your own words without ever giving any credit to the previously published work. So this is termed as text plagiarism. And this is the most commonly occurring plagiarism issue presently. And there are various ways to detect this text plagiarism. There are several softwares which most of you may be already aware of. They are also available commercially as well as uh, mm, free online softwares. Typically, they go with the names like Authentic, Urkund, and things like that. And most of these are commercial softwares, which are very, very expensive. And so you can use these softwares on any article, on your own article also, and try to see whether your manuscript or an article clears the plagiarism test or not. And see, one thing is that whenever you try to run these softwares, see, they are very expensive, so they are not available for everyone. But mostly big institutions, especially DAE, most of the units of DAE have acquired this software, and many of the universities also have acquired these softwares, and they are available for the employees or faculty and students of those institutes and universities. So one can officially use these softwares to check for plagiarism of your thesis or manuscript, etc. There's another kind of plagiarism which is slightly different, and it can be also probably sometimes more serious than even text plagiarism. And this is called idea plagiarism. And this, idea plagiarism is something which is really, really bad. See, what happens is that here the text of a previous article is not copied here. What happens here is the idea or the scientific idea which has been already published, number one, okay, by someone else earlier, or this idea could have been also been talked about in a conference by someone, but probably not published also. So when such ideas are taken up by someone, okay, and then when that person tries to use those ideas and then pass them off as his or her own idea, then this is something which is called as idea plagiarism. And unfortunately, this plagiarism software, this cannot detect an idea plagiarism, okay? Like what text plagiarism can be detected, the softwares usually cannot detect ideas, plagiarism of scientific ideas. And that's what one can say that softwares are not philosophical by nature. And again, to quote Dr. Chadda, he says that to scientists, plagiarism of an idea strikes at the very heart of research as a creative enterprise. Okay. So I can just give you one example here, okay, before I go on to details about different kinds of plagiarism, etc. This Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in the year 1952 was actually awarded to this person, Salman Waxman. And for what was it awarded? It was for his discovery of streptomycin, which is a very, very common antibiotic these days. Okay, it is called the first generation antibiotic. Okay. And this was the very first antibiotic which was used, and it was effective against a very, very terrible disease which is even prevalent today, which is tuberculosis. In those days, late 1940s, there were no medicines or antibiotics which were effective against tuberculosis. And this was the very first medicine which managed to treat tuberculosis and save people. But unfortunately, there was a very, very dark story behind this Nobel Prize, which was awarded to Salman Waxman. And what was this story? See, actually, Waxman was not the real person who discovered streptomycin. It was actually his student, Albert Schatz, who was actually working under him for as a postgraduate. And it was actually first discovered by this person. And then this person was working in a dungeon, okay, 3 floors below Waxman's office at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And why was he working 3 floors below? Because tuberculosis was highly infective, and Waxman did not really want to go anywhere near these strains of bacteria. And since Schatz was doing this work, he relegated him to this place, and he never, in fact, visited that basement at all. So this person, he was a very intense student who worked day and night, and then finally found the strain of this bacteria which could work against tuberculosis infection. And in fact, it should have been the proudest moment for Albert Schatz that he should have been declared as the discoverer of streptomycin along with his supervisor. But it did not happen, it never happened, and he simply had to watch helpless as Waxman got all the credit. And in his own words, you can see that what Schatz has written about his discovery on October 1943, he realized that he had a new antibiotic, and he named it streptomycin, and in fact sealed a test tube with this strain of bacteria, and then it is now residing at the Smithsonian Institution in the United States. Okay. And at that moment, of course, he never had an idea that this new antibiotic would be really effective in treating people with tuberculosis. But then, unfortunately, it so happened that as time went by, Waxman never really gave him any credit, and he started saying on his own that he was the actual discoverer for streptomycin. This issue went on for several years, and finally, even in, as recent as early 2000, it was realized that this person was not given. At that time, there were several factors which worked against Albert Schatz. Why? Because, the scientific establishment, it closes ranks against a student all the time. Please remember this. So, and at that time, of course, I'm talking about a different age. And when this happened, when Schatz came out shouting that, look, I was the person who did this discovery, immediately people started closing ranks and then stopped responding to him, especially after when Waxman was awarded the Nobel Prize. I mean, how could they, anyone say that he's a Nobel Prize winner and you say that you have discovered it? So this is what happens very often, and this is also, I would say, a very severe form of plagiarism. Okay. Yeah, then we have a third kind of plagiarism, which is called self-plagiarism. This is slightly different, and this usually is not construed as a very, very, very serious misconduct. It is still a misconduct. And what is this self-plagiarism? Here what happens is that the same individual, what he does is he draws upon his one or several of his earlier works, which has already published, and then he tries to pick up phrases or passages or figures from his earlier published papers and includes them in a new manuscript, and submits it as a a new manuscript. And sometimes it does get published also. And and see, there are two ways this can happen. Sometimes when you're working on a very, very complex research problem, usually you might have come across papers, scientific papers, which are termed as part one, part two, or part three, and things like that. So what it means is that there is a very complex research problem which requires several publications with different stages of research, and then so it's a connected series of research problems. So naturally, when you have that kind of a research problem, you tend to repeat certain passages from the earlier publications in your subsequent publications. Here, it may not be termed as self-plagiarism if and only if you simply cite your earlier work, give credit to yourself. Okay, so you are the victim in a way. Okay, so you give credit to yourself by citing your earlier publications, and then everything is fine. Okay, there's no problem. But then, so this is an unintentional thing. But sometimes it can be very intentional also, where you intentionally copy text from your earlier publications and then put together a collage and then try to create a new manuscript, and that is not a correct thing. Okay, and so one has to be careful, and whenever you do that, you must refer to your earlier publications. Otherwise, you will be termed as if that you have simply plagiarized your own papers earlier, which is now called self-plagiarism. And this can also often happen when you sometimes present results in a conference, and either in a poster form or a lecture or a presentation, oral presentation form. And when you show certain figures and data, things like that, and when the same figures get published later in a journal, that can also be construed as a self-plagiarism. Because you see, in earlier days, whenever conference presentations happened, there were two cases. Either the results were immediately published as a part of the conference, or they were just put as abstracts and they were not published actually. So in such cases, when you actually present data, what happens is that even if it's an abstract, nowadays they get recorded, and even an abstract gets recorded nowadays and gets published with some identifier and things like that. And one can easily go back and see whether your software can easily track this and then bring out that you have plagiarized your own article which you have presented in a conference. So again, whenever you try to do that, there's certain different kinds of approaches one can use for this particular case, and try to take care by citing and your earlier work which you have presented in a conference and things like that, and then go about in publishing your further papers. Okay, and here I would like to just give you an insight by M. Roy, who has written a very good article, okay, called Avoiding Plagiarism, Self-Plagiarism and Other Questionable Writing Practices, a Guide to Ethical Writing. And this is available on the website of Office of the Research Integrity, ORI, and one can easily download this article. It's a very, very good article, which I advise all of you to please download and go through this. So he writes, ethical writing entails an implicit contract between the reader and writer, whereby the reader assumes, unless otherwise noted, that the material was written by the individual listed as an author, and that it is new and is accurate to the best of the author's abilities. What does this mean? It means that whenever you publish a paper, okay, of course, there will be readers who will be reading your papers. So what is implicit in that is that the reader assumes that whatever you have written and presented in your work as a paper that work has been done by you, and you have presented that as your work, and it is a novel work, whatever it is, and unless of course you have cited a previous reference or whatever. So it is assumed that it is your work and your original work, and that is the understanding which the reader will have. So if you try to break that kind of a trust or a contract, you are committing a scientific misconduct. Okay, that means if an author replicates text which he has published earlier elsewhere, it should be made clear to the reader. And this can be done by making clear that the text is recycled and the original source is also cited. And there could also be what are called copyright permissions, okay? Because whenever you try to copy a figure which has been published earlier, usually there are certain copyright laws. One must know about it. You must be aware of these copyright laws. And so if the copyright law deems that you must take a permission, you must definitely do that, okay, before you reuse that text or a figure from an earlier published article. And but again, when you write proposals for funding, okay, from grant agencies for funding and for your research work, here you don't have to worry about doing a self-plagiarism, because these funding proposals, they are not published in any journal or something like that. They are purely documents for scientists to see whether your research problem is worth getting a grant or something like that. So here it doesn't matter if you present your own old results, etc., and nobody will bother about this part. Okay. All right. So then coming to the other kind of plagiarism, which is idea plagiarism. So it is not just always a text plagiarism, but mostly it is text. But again, this can also happen if a scientist, say, makes a detailed presentation of a novel idea, okay, uh, which was actually proposed by someone else who has not yet published that. And this particular scientist happened to hear that hear that other scientist talking about this idea. And then he at a different forum comes and talks about this idea and says that it is his own idea, without even letting know that, look, he has picked it up from an earlier person. Then what will happen? He'll be simply making the audience believe that he is the actual originator of the idea. Okay. So this is what a typical example of an idea plagiarism. Okay. So what could be the different consequences of this kind of plagiarism? I have just listed down some of these types and consequences. I think the last line there is some issue. I don't know if it can be hidden. Yes, now it's done. Yeah, this was also published by Miguel Roig in Office of Research Integrity Publication. So he has given some examples of what could be the consequences of plagiarism. So he talks about an historian who had to resign from the Pulitzer Board. What is a Pulitzer Board? Pulitzer is an award, it's a literature award given for, there are about 20 categories under this award, mostly connected with literature and related topics. So a historian had to resign from this Pulitzer Board. Why? Because it was alleged that she had actually appropriated text from other sources in one of her own books. Then there was a newspaper journalist who was found to have plagiarized material for some of his articles in the paper, and he was found out and he had to resign his position. Then there was a story of a biochemist who had to resign from a very prestigious clinic because of accusations that a book that he wrote contained appropriated portions of text from a National Academy of Sciences report. And see, in all these cases, they have been asked to go or whatever because they have not given due credit to the earlier articles. And this can happen even in the field of music, which is very, very common these days. I'm sure our Bollywood industry is full of these issues of music being plagiarized from earlier works of other music directors. So we can have musicians also being found guilty of unconscious plagiarism sometimes by including uh, some pieces from another music group's songs or things like that. Okay, and sometimes it can be very costly because you have to end up paying a lot of compensation for this kind of infraction. Then there was a college president, which is equivalent to a vice chancellor in our country. He was forced to resign after allegations that he failed to attribute some material which he presented as a part of a college convocation speech. Very, very innocuous looking thing, but it becomes very serious when a senior person does this kind of act. And then there was a US politician who had his master's degree. Okay, that means he did his master's degree long back. And when he became a politician, somebody dug out that he plagiarized something in his master's degree thesis. And he had to withdraw completely from the political race. And there was a case of an education minister who had to resign because the university simply rescinded her doctoral thesis for plagiarism. Similarly, there was one other example done. So, what are all these consequences? Basically, first thing is your own credibility. Your own credibility is now at stake, gets damaged, and then you're standing among your own peers. See, earlier people would have been regarding you as something. Now they will look at you with suspicion and with a different eye. And then there could be legal issues. There could be fines, compensations. You have to pay compensations, like the music case which I talked about, and there could be other things also, and the violation of copyright laws. So one thing you must try to find out and learn, even though you may say that why should I bother about copyright laws when I'm doing some research in some other topic. It is essential because nowadays all research gets copyrighted, and whenever you present it in a journal, the journal copyrights the article, and even you surrender your own right sometimes, mostly, unless it's an open access journal where you pay and you get what is called a Creative Commons license. So violation of copyright laws also is a big issue you get into when you do plagiarism. And then once you plagiarize and you are known to have plagiarized an article, okay, you will land up in difficulties in publishing your subsequent work, because now you'll be given a stamp or a mark saying that you are a person who has plagiarized earlier. And these days, in the earlier days, of course, there was no internet and information travel was very, very slow. But nowadays, anything you do gets known in a second by everybody. So it will be very difficult for you to publish later your own work in other journals. And then there could be academic fines, penalties. And most common would be, say, promotion avenues. Your promotion avenues can be blocked because if you have been found out as a plagiarist, it may be even worse. You could be even suspended from your position, and these are quite severe. And why do you want to get into those issues? So please don't get into this business of plagiarism. Be aware about it. So then comes the question, why do people actually plagiarize? It's a very, very important question for which there are no direct, straight answers. variety of reasons, and people do this activity for different reasons. Okay, and see, nowadays especially, it's a rat race almost, and it's a dog eat dog world. So research is very highly competitive. Why is it competitive? Because everyone wants to do something new. Okay, you want to create something new. You want to create new knowledge. You want to create, say, work on novel ideas, come out with novel things. Okay, but when you do this, okay, when you create new knowledge or propound a new hypothesis or an idea, once you do that, it is done. You cannot do it again because it's already done. You can only create a new knowledge only once. Because once it is done, you cannot create the same knowledge twice over. So the consequence of this is that either you will be the first person across the line winning the race, or if you are not the first person, you will be the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever. That is, they are called also rans. Okay. Now the problem is, if you are an also ran, it becomes more and more difficult for you to publish that particular idea because it has already been published earlier. So unless you do something else to that idea, turn it around, or do some extra thing with that, it is very difficult to get that same idea published in another high impact journal, because the journals themselves, they always look for novelty and things like. They will say that, oh, this work is not novel enough. And even many of the funding agencies, they also, after this quest for novelty, they will keep on saying, oh, your research proposal is not novel enough, so why should we grant you money? So the result of all this is a mad scramble to become the first in the line with an idea in this cutting edge research. And this rush, for publishing or putting on record your research work, that creates problems and pressures and gets people into a lot of trouble. So some people actually fall prey to this temptation, and they try to adopt very devious and unethical methods to obtain publications. Then sometimes, this can become a pathological problem. How? Because once you become a plagiarist, there's a saying that once you are a plagiarist, you are often a plagiarist. So once you get into this business of plagiarism, sometimes it's like a disease. You go on doing this again and again. Okay. Then there could be another issue, which is lack of confidence in your own abilities. Okay. When this happens, again, there's a severe pressure on you to plagiarize others. Then time management. This is a very important problem, issue. Because very often you see everywhere, everyone is under uh, this constraint of time. Okay, a PhD student, okay, he will get fellowship for maximum of 5 years in India. He cannot get a fellowship beyond 5 years in India for a PhD. Okay, and many of the funding agencies, they give projects with funding for students with 3 years. Okay, so you have a problem of constraint of time. So unless you are very methodical with your research work, etc., you will fall behind, and then you'll find that you're not having time to do or write properly and publish your work. And then this forces you to again try and do some plagiarism and try to get around this problem of time. So this is a very important thing which many of you might encounter. So please be aware that you are on fixed time constraint, especially when you are your PhD students. You must try and plan your research work so that you do not succumb to this problem of time management. Another reason would be rank laziness. So you just don't care. Okay, you don't want to undertake complicated research, but then you are in a position where you are supposed to do complicated research, and then but if you are too lazy to do that, you may again resort to plagiarism. Then again, there could be people like once a plagiarist, often a plagiarist, such kind of people who do this just for the thrill of the whole thing. Okay, that they will feel that they can never be caught doing this plagiarism, and they will go on doing it just for the thrill. Then another issue is very often found in non-English speaking countries is because of language skills. See, poor paraphrasing. Whenever you read a previous work, unconsciously you may try to bring in those phrases and passages which you have read into your own work. So you must be careful in doing this because you have to be very careful and paraphrase this properly so that you don't get into trouble. And so this very often happens because of language skills. You may not be able to do that, so you just simply copy. And you may also sometimes just unintentionally miss out on citations. See, this is very difficult to spot, whether you have unintentionally missed a citation or whether you intentionally missed a citation. Unless you know something about the person and his work, you may not be able to make it out. And finally, you can also see that there's a lack of awareness of laws, about copyright laws and many other such things, and which can also make you plagiarize sometimes unintentionally also. So now if you come to quantification of plagiarism, UGC has brought out, as I said, this gazette in which they have very clearly identified and quantified these levels of plagiarism. And what are these levels? They start from level 0. So here, level 0 means that there are similarities of up to 10% in your manuscript or a thesis. And these are considered as very minor similarities, and there are no penalties involved. Then there could be what is called a level 1 similarity or plagiarism, where the similarities are between 10 to 40%. Then next is level 2 plagiarism, where the similarities are between 40 to 60%. And finally, we have the worst one, which is level 3, the highest level of plagiarism, where similarities are above 60%. Now, UGC has given very clear regulations on what should be the punishments for each of these misdemeanors. Okay. So this is what I showed you was what UGC had put out. In other places, there are other statutory bodies like IEEE, for example, which is Institution of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. It's a very important international body. They have also come out with their quantification of levels of plagiarism. Here, level 1 itself starts as the worst one. Okay, so level 1 plagiarism is basically uncredited verbatim copying of a full paper or verbatim copying of a major portion, which is more than 50% of that paper in your own paper. So that is considered as the most serious form of plagiarism by IEEE. Then the level 2 in IEEE is the uncredited verbatim copying of a large portion, which is less than 50%. So it's something similar to UGC saying above 50%, below above 60%, between 40 and 60%, etc. Okay. So level 3 is uncredited verbatim copying of individual elements, which are paragraphs, sentences, etc. And level 4 is uncredited improper paraphrasing. And level 5 is credited verbatim copying of a major portion, but without clear delineation. So I'll tell you what delineation means. So delineation means that whenever you try to copy verbatim, even though you credit it, there's a certain way you need to do it. If you're taking a passage from an earlier published work, one has to give this passage in quotes, or you have to give an indentation to this passage on the rest of the text of your manuscript, and then give it the credit. So that's the right form of actually presenting an earlier published work verbatim. Okay, so you can take a passage from the earlier work, put it in quotes, or put it in give it an indent, and then give the citation for that. Give the credit, give the citation. So this is the most correct form of acknowledging a previous work without being called as a plagiarism case. Now, what are the punishments in India? This is most important for you for thesis and dissertations. Level 0, similarities up to 10%, there's no penalty. Level 1, you start getting punishments. Between 10 to 40% similarities, the student will be asked to submit a revised manuscript or the thesis within some stipulated time period of not exceeding 6 months. Then it becomes more and more serious. Similarities between level 2, similarities between 40 to 60%. And this student will be actually debarred from submitting a revised script for a period of 1 year. You know, this is very nasty. Okay. Because imagine at the end of 5 years, you want to submit your thesis and you're not bothered to properly check for plagiarism, or you have maybe intentionally done plagiarism, and then the consequence is disastrous. Because once you're found out that your manuscript or thesis has 40 to 60% similarity, then you cannot submit the same thesis for a period of 1 year. And for a student at the end of his career, end of his PhD period, this can be very, very damaging because you will be already out of fellowship, you may not have registration, and all kinds of problems. You have to ask for an extension of registration and things like that. So that itself is a big problem. Then the worst case is that you have plagiarized for more than 60%, and such a student is simply asked to get out, and his registration is cancelled, and all those things. It's a very, very bad situation. So please be careful. Don't get into this last two levels under any condition whenever you try to finish your PhD thesis. Then in publications, this is mainly relevant for the faculty. Okay, again, after level 0, there are no penalty. In level 1, you'll be asked to withdraw the manuscript. And level 2, 40 to 60%, you have to withdraw the manuscript, and the faculty will be denied a right to 1 annual increment. And then you'll not be allowed to be a supervisor to any new students for a period of 2 years. And these days, this can be already nasty. And finally, at level 3, which is about 60%, again, you will be asked to withdraw the manuscript. You'll be denied a right to 2 successive annual increments, which is very bad because you lose your seniority. And you'll not be allowed to be a supervisor to any new student for a period of 3 years. And this can be very damaging to faculty who is actively involved in research. Okay, so now I'll try to quickly go through some case histories of plagiarism. Because you see, unless I show you how this plagiarism has occurred, you may not be able to really appreciate this. So this was an article which was published in a journal called IJACSA, on something on advanced computer science. And this was something on data science. Okay, so this was published in this journal, and then the editor of this journal, he got a communication from someone who wrote that a few days ago I came across a data science article titled so and so in this in your journal, volume so and so, etc. And I'm extremely upset to discover that there are almost all the sections, algorithms, and even plots which are unoriginal and deliberately copied from the previously published work of mine. So actually, this was a master student at University of Waterloo who wrote this letter to the editor. So then, of course, immediately the editor worked on this, and then it constituted a committee, and then finally this article was retracted. And you can see that statement from the editor. After careful and considered review of the content of this paper by a duly constituted expert committee, this paper has been found to be in violation of IJACSA's publication principles. We hereby retract the content of this paper. Reasonable effort should be made to remove all past references to this paper. So that's how, a paper is actually retracted from publication. So in print, of course, it's already published and it's there if it happens to be in print, but from online records, it is removed. So these days, very few people, I don't know how many of you have actually visited your library in the last few days. Many of the students and even faculty, they will take recourse to internet to go through journals and articles. So there it really helps because the article gets retracted from the online journal. Okay, then there was another very strange case where the journal retracted a paper titled on Kirchhoff matrix. And it's a mathematical article and published by a set of a set of people there. And then the editor found that there's a problem and he retracts it. Why? Because after publication, it became clear that the paper had been submitted without consent, knowledge, and acknowledgement of this person, Bitul Kakar, and the authors. They also acknowledge that they failed to obtain agreement with Bitul Akar or to acknowledge her work, resulting in an unfair representation of ideas and thoughts. And all those involved have agreed to retraction. Actually, this Bitul Akar happened to be a student of one of the authors of this paper, and the student wrote to the journal saying that she had actually done the work and nothing was attributed to her. So the journal makes some full inquiry and the authors accepted. They acknowledged that the student's name must have been entered. So this paper was retracted. Then there was another paper called Vision in a journal called Vision. And here again, strangely, it so happened that one of the authors himself writes to the journal saying that please retract the article. Probably it must have been found out by someone and someone must have written to him, etc., saying that, look, we have done some mischief here, and look what he has actually written to the editor. My name is Babin Das. I requested Professor Meyer and Moon to assist me in getting a paper published in Vision. And this is the name of the paper. And I'm a PhD student in India. I needed a publication in order to submit my thesis. I am the first author of this manuscript, and I admit that I obtained a paper in an unethical behavior made by myself only. I did not write the paper, but I told my co-authors whom I requested to assist me that it was my work. I lied to them and may have gotten them into trouble. They have only assisted me so far, and I apologize for my mistake. All these things, it looks clearly that it is all scripted, because very clearly, I'm sure this was a student, and this student's boss must have actually encouraged him to do all this. And when he was caught out, he simply put the whole blame on the student. So then again, I would like to remind all of you students especially that, look, these problems keep occurring, and the person who gets the stick first will be the student. And then there was another case, this was given by Dr. Chadda. There was a paper which was published in Physical Review B, which is a high impact journal in area of physics. And there was an article which had this line which is highlighted. The direction and the magnitude of shielding current for any change in the external field is assumed to be such so as to minimize the change of the total flux content in the sample. So this passage actually was lifted from a previously published article by Dr. Chadda and his group. And then it was found out. And then I guess probably Dr. Chadda wrote to the editor of the Physical Review B. And then the author was actually forced to write an erratum. Okay. So what is an erratum? Erratum is a correction of a published article by the author saying that he has made some mistake or whatever. So here he writes the reference number 8, okay, is missing at the end of this third sentence in this section, etc. And now it should read as so and so with reference number 8. Okay. So this shows again how the plagiarism gets corrected. But there is a problem. I'll tell you later whether this has solved the problem also or not. Then there was another case where a very big name in Compton scattering from University of Houston published again in Physical Review B an article in which he has simply refused to give credit to previous idea, okay, published earlier. And what was this? There was a paper published by Chadda and Sani in Nuclear Physics and Solid State Physics, India. What is this volume? This volume basically is a compilation of abstracts presented at the yearly DAE conference. In those days, it used to be Nuclear Physics and Solid State Physics conference. Nowadays, these two are separate. But in 1975, it's one conference, a big mela, where all the known nuclear and solid state physicists in the country used to gather and discuss the results. So this result was presented in this conference, and it was also presented in a very low profile journal, Physical Status Solidi, and so it was in print. But still, this person in 1976 refused to acknowledge that the same idea was actually published earlier. But then when this was pointed out to the editor, he had to publish an erratum saying that it has been pointed out that some observations, what is some observation? Basically, previous idea in the paper had been stated previously and appropriate references should be added. So this is how, I mean, people can steal your idea and then present it as their own idea. And there was another case involving this person, by name Ravo from France. For those of you who are in condensed matter physics, Ravo is a very big name, international name. He keeps coming to India also. He is a member of the Bangalore Academy of Sciences. So they published a paper where they used, this is a very, very interesting situation here. See, they used a term in their paper just called cooling and heating in unequal field protocol. And considerable space has been given to this protocol in their paper published in Physical Review B in 2011. They also call this as CHUF, which is acronym for cooling and heating in unequal field. What they didn't do was that this particular acronym and this term was coined by Dr. Chadda and his group way back in 2005 and 2009. There are several papers in this time period before this was published where they in fact coined this acronym CHUF, which means cooling and heating in unequal. Now, these people in this paper, they just never bothered to cite these earlier papers which already existed in literature. Now, what happens, you see, the problem is like this. See, suppose the authors of this paper, earlier paper had kept quiet. Now, any subsequent reader of this paper would be led to believe that these three authors are the first persons to have coined this word and this kind of a acronym for this kind of a protocol, isn't it? So that shows how a scientific idea can be easily appropriated by someone else if they don't give proper credit. And then, because they were caught, because the editor was made to see the earlier publications, it was a very blatant mistake, misconduct. So now they had to furnish an apology. The authors did not cite a relevant and important reference, and this acronym CHAF protocol that has been used and described in our section of this paper, in our paper, was first published in this reference in 2009, and we apologize for this omission. Okay. But then what is the problem? The problem is that the paper was published in 2011, and by the time the erratum was published, again, of course, it was published in 2011, but at a much later time. Okay, this was in June and this was in August. Now, people who read this paper, they just don't know that there was an erratum published 2-3 months later. They just don't care. Some people may notice, of course, but very often people will not notice. And you can see by the number of citations, this paper was cited already 25 times and the correction was cited only 6 times. So there is no closure even after the editors sought the apology from these authors. And why did this happen? This happened because whenever you download a paper which was suspicious or which had problems, this erratum is not linked to this paper. So it is all the more essential for journals these days that if there is an erratum or there is a problem or a mistake, that erratum must be connected and linked to this original paper. And whenever whoever happens to click on this should be immediately made aware that, look, there is an erratum which has been published a few months later or a few years later. That will, of course, lead to a proper closure. Okay. Otherwise, it's still as good as this paper will be as good as new. For those who don't or miss or don't bother about this errata. Okay. And then there was also another case where there was a very smart guy by name Kainuma who was the leader of this research group in Tohoku University, Sendai. And so there were several papers which he published, which he used this term kinetic arrest, which was initially used again by Dr. Chadda's group in Indore. There were several papers which came with this word kinetic arrest. It referred to a certain first order phase transition dynamics in some alloys. So this was a very, very new idea and something new which was propounded by this Indore group. So this Japanese group also published several papers in which they started, of course, citing them earlier and calling it kinetic arrest, but after some time, they stopped referring to the earlier papers. So even though this was referred close to 100 times in this article, this manuscript has absolutely no reference to the earlier papers which actually give this word kinetic arrest. Then the editors themselves, they actually notice this, and then two references, they appear as additional relevant references. Okay. But then these guys were even smarter. They tried to get around this problem by doing what? They tried to change the terminology itself of that particular scientific this transformation, okay, or the term for which it was given. So they now stopped calling it kinetic arrest. They started calling it with a different name, that is thermal transformation arrest. And here in the first paper, he calls it, which was called kinetic arrest in our previous paper. So now he's trying to get around the reason to cite earlier papers by stopping calling it as kinetic errors and giving it some new name, so they don't have to refer to earlier papers. So this is one way, people try to cheat and take credit for which they have not done any uh, work at all. So they were trying to change the terminology, but fortunately, some of the reviewers, they could notice this and then insist the authors that, look, you are simply trying to cheat and you must give proper credit. Okay. So that's how sometimes you get saved, but not very often. See, I can tell you very easily that whenever problems occur to any person from the West, they immediately get corrected. But unfortunately, whenever it happens to be a third world country or an unknown byline, very rarely it gets corrected. Then there was another very interesting situation where how plagiarism can occur. There was a person by this name, Danzinger, who submitted a manuscript to this journal on some biology article or something on proteins. And then it turned out that the referees were not sending the reports in time, and they were not getting that for a long time. So then they thought that, look, there's no point in waiting for the referee reports, etc. And they decided not to publish this article in this journal and withdrew that article. But then suddenly what happened was he noticed that in a different journal, exactly the same manuscript appeared with almost all content, everything is same. And it was published in a different journal under different names, different authors. Immediately, this author, Danzinger, realized that probably the reviewer of his article, which was submitted to Annals, was himself working in this area, and he wanted to publish his work, this Danzinger's work as his own work, reviewer's own work. And that's what he did. So then they pursued this case with the editor of this journals. And then, fortunately, the editor of this journal and this journal, they agreed to talk. And then they found out that the person who reviewed the first annals manuscript was, in fact, an author in this journal, and hence he was caught. And then this was retracted. Okay, and there was a I don't know what. Okay, then you can see that this person has written an open article in Annals of Internal Medicine. You can simply type Danzinger and plagiarism, you can get this references. Okay, and there were several cases where even Nature has chronicled a lot of cases where very prominent figures, political figures, were asked to step down because they all plagiarized long back when they were doing their thesis or whatever, and then they had to pay the price much later. Okay, and even people in India are also not too far behind, and one can see that there have been articles in Nature on Indian authors also. So what is closure? A complete retraction of a plagiarist paper indicates that it's a full closure for the author whose work or idea has been plagiarized. That means that article online is removed and one can no longer access that article. But then, as I said, whenever there is just an apology or an erratum which is issued or a correction which is issued, there is no proper closure unless, that the journal links that erratum to the main paper itself. Because that plagiarized paper would simply continue to get cited, while this erratum, which appears much later, simply goes unnoticed by many people. Okay. So how to avoid this plagiarism? You always cite the original source of the work. Try to summarize and paraphrase, but not always. You cannot paraphrase beyond a certain point. So try to be original in your writing and thinking. And so if you want to really paraphrase a previously published article or passage, you must try to read that particular passage again and again, and then assimilate it in your mind, identify which are the main points, and then without looking at that original passage, try to write it down as your own passage, okay? And then after that, you compare it with the original passage and see how it compares. So hopefully that should not be, there should not be any similarity there, and it should be your own work, okay? So don't plagiarize and try to protect yourselves against plagiarism. It's a very unethical practice. Please don't do this because you are all students. You may not get caught at this point of time, but later it can be caught and the consequences can be very bad. And just simply give credit wherever it is due. And this is a big problem. In fact, I found that many of Indians don't do this. They don't want to give credit when it is due. And try to avoid self-plagiarism by giving proper references to your earlier work. And because especially when you become much more senior later, this can come back to haunt you. And then if you happen to be having some out-of-the-box ideas which you know are very good, you must try to protect yourself. And because you see, there are wolves out there all over, and especially, you know, well-established researchers and respected researchers, they are not so ethical sometimes, okay? They can easily pick ideas which are talked about by young students and try to accept those ideas. So you must be very careful, especially if you know that you have out-of-box idea. So try not to get screwed by others. Okay. Okay, so that comes to the end of this talk. So I think there are some questions. How to check plagiarism while writing the review article? No problem. Again, as I said, whenever you write a review article, you see, you'll be definitely doing a lot of referencing and picking up from earlier published work. You can do that, but then when you write about earlier published work, don't write their own passages. So be careful about this part, and either you put those things in quotes and indentation, okay, or write it in your own words and then give a reference to that, give a credit to that person, okay. So that's how you try to stop plagiarism when you actually try to write a review article. I know it's a difficult thing to write a review article without getting into this problem of plagiarism. You have to be very, very careful. That's why, you know, writing a review article is very difficult, and that's why they are sought after by review articles are sought after by many people. Okay. Then any other questions? Please check. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions. So if you wish, you can even, what will be the exam pattern? I think you're asking this question too early. There are several lectures to go through, and you're asking for an exam pattern now. Okay, don't worry, we'll definitely discuss this later. And so I think there are no more questions. So thank you very much.
Okay.